So we've always thought that this was the basis. And see, this is where if you don't understand the Declaration, you don't understand the principles we're contending for with Article 5. You got to know why we're doing what we're doing. U.S. Supreme Court, back in the day, it was really easy for them. They said the Constitution is but the body and letter of which the Declaration is the thought and the spirit. It's always safe to read the letter of the Constitution and the spirit of the Declaration of Independence. So those two things are not to be separated. Now, going back to the Constitution, going back to Article 5, how do we get the basis, the principles there? This is where we want to look at those 161 words, those 6 principles. Let me read those 161 words to you. You'll recognize them. Some of you may know them. It says very simply, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitles them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, and whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles. Now, those 161 words just gave you 6 tick marks that you can put on your list. 6 things that they said, this is what government's supposed to do. Washington says, the fundamental principle of our Constitution requires that the will of the majority shall prevail. You have Thomas Jefferson, who started the other political party of the day, who said the same thing. He says, the will of the majority, the natural law of every society, is the only sure guardian of the rights of man. Now, this is the fundamental principle of the Constitution, which is why, by the way, they did not allow judges to make national policy, because that was not the consent of the governed. As a matter of fact, today, the judges are very good at turning over the consent of the governed. The laws that people pass, whether it be the 33 states that passed marriage laws, whether it be the states that are passing educational choice laws, whatever it is, the courts are saying, well, we're not elected, but you guys don't know what you really need, so let us tell you what you need. The Founding Fathers were explicit. As a matter of fact, there's the most frequently covered subject in the Constitution of the United States is how to get rid of activist judges. Did you know that? 6 clauses in the Constitution deal with how to get rid of activist judges. That's more than any other subject. That was a big deal to them. They did not want people who were unelected telling the citizens what their policies would be. So the consent of the governed was the will of majority rule, if you will. Now, let me take you through those first 5 principles, because I want you to see something here. Remember, the first one was absolute moral standard, fixed right and wrong that establishes absolute truth. There's a divine creator who gives inalienable rights. Government exists primarily to protect those rights, and the consent of the governed. Consent of the governed, which is the one we talk about today, the will of majority elections, that's number 5 on the list. Why? Well, because the consent of the governed doesn't matter when it comes to inalienable rights. Let's vote on whether there should be slavery. It really doesn't matter what your vote is on slavery. God said liberty is what we get. Let's vote on whether we can defend ourselves. No, vote doesn't matter. It can be 99-1, and I still have the right to defend myself whether people voted down or not. So you don't get to vote on inalienable rights. You also don't get to vote on moral rights and wrongs. Let's vote on whether rape should be a crime. No, that violates the laws of nature and nature's God if we don't vote on that. So we don't get to vote on moral standards, and we don't get to vote on inalienable rights. So what do we vote on? You can vote on whether the sidewalk should be 4 feet wide, 5 feet wide, or 6 feet wide. You can vote on whether the speed limit should be 45, 55, or if you're in Texas, 85 is our speed limit. We have a lot of fun there. You can vote on, but you don't get to vote on see, that's why it's number 5 on the list. People think the will of the majority is number 1 on the list. I get to set my own standards. No, this is how liberty works. This is why we've lasted 232 years, because we've had a set of principles that didn't change with every whim that came across. Now, here's the 6th and final one. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, in other words, when a form of government says, well, we don't think there's rights and wrongs, and by the way, we don't think you should have the right to acknowledge God and your inalienable rights, we'll tell you what they are and what you can do with them, and all this, and we don't exist primarily to protect your rights, you exist to serve us in government. Anytime government becomes destructive of these ends, anytime the will of the majority is no longer significant, it says it's the right of the people to alter or to abolish government and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles. So the 6th principle is, if the government doesn't do the first 5, you get to start a new one or change it. Now, we don't need a revolution every time government screws up. I mean, that's not what we're after. But there is a principle in the Declaration that says the people have the right to change and make changes to their government. See, this is what came into the Constitution as Article 5. Oh, back up here. That was Article 5. Article 5 says, hey, we recognize that there's going to be changes you need to make from time to time. Here's how you can do it. And see, one of the things the Founding Fathers understood is you don't let the body who's out of control be in charge of making the changes. So when the federal government has got itself out of bounds, the federal courts have got themselves out of bounds, although they're doing a great job of turning things around right now. I wish I could tell you all the good things happening in the courts. It's unbelievable. 147 new judges, and probably 90% of them are guys I would have chosen if I had the chance. But this is the deal. They put a pressure relief valve in the Constitution so that we wouldn't have to throw the whole thing out and start again. We're giving you an ability to do something other nations haven't had, and that's the ability to make changes when your government gets out of control. And we're not going to wait on Washington, D.C. to make the changes because they're most likely the ones that got out of control. And that's why the 9th and the 10th Amendment were added to the Bill of Rights because, hey, by the way, in case we miss saying something, the people and the states are in charge. And so that's what you have with Article 5 is the people and the states get to make changes. We're not just relying on the federal government to make the changes. We think the people should have. That's part of checks and balances. Checks and balances is an outside entity being able to exert leverage and control and restraint on an out-of-balance entity. And that's why we say the president can exert restraint on Congress or the courts. And the courts can help restrain Congress and the president. Congress can help restrain the courts and the president. We do that so that the other entities have some control. That's what the Article 5 was all about. It gives the people the ability, people and the states, the ability to come in and leverage and say, hey, we need some changes made here because this thing is way out of bounds. It's no longer doing the fundamental principles that it's supposed to be doing. So that's why that's so significant. So in closing this down, the Constitution, I would argue, is a superb document. It doesn't need to be fundamentally changed. We can make changes along the way as we have with 27 amendments. Another way to make changes is through Article 5, letting the states have their voice. We've kind of emasculated the states over the last 20 to 30 years, and they don't even know why they exist anymore. They don't even know why the Senate used to exist, and they're starting to push back.